We'll start in 5 minutes. Welcome to the overview session of the course Design of Steel Structures taught by Professor Damodar Maiti. I am Trisha Chakraborty, one of the course teaching assistants of this course. I am a second year PhD student in the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. So, there are two broad branches of structural engineering. Analysis and design. Analysis is a forward problem where we are given the structural dimensions, the boundary conditions, and applied loads, and we have to find the response induced in the structure in terms of forces, stresses, deflections, and strains. While design is the inverse problem, here we are not given the structural dimensions. Determining the structural dimension and the materials to be used and the connectivity is what we have to do. It is the output of design is that, and for that, the first step we have to do an analysis anyway because uh, we are not given the loads to be withstood by individual elements. Generally, while designing a structure, we are given the overall loads to be withstood by the structure as a whole, like wind load, dead load, live load, earthquake load, flood loads, fire loading, and all that. So we can get those criteria from the code, and then we have to carry. Then we have to take an assumptions about the uh, what structural elements we are going to use and how we are going to connect them. Then we have to analyze, see, uh, we have to analyze, seeing that whatever loads are coming on the structure as a whole. After analysis, we will get to know what is the load coming on each of the elements, and then we have to see that if the material and the cross section length that we have assumed is enough to withstand that or not. If it is fine, we can let it go ahead the design, and if it is not, we have to go back and then make a fresh assumption, taking into account whatever wherever it fell short. For example, if an eye section falls short in flexural capacity, we would probably attach plates or a channel on the flanges. If it falls short in shear, we would take an eye section with a greater, like a thickness, with a higher thickness of web. So according to that, we have to propose another design. Then we have to again go through the entire process. We cannot let the design go ahead till we have seen that it is sufficient. So design is an iterative process. Analysis is a more straightforward process, and design are is done using following the Indian codes for India, and for all the countries in the world have their own design codes. For example, the American Institute of Steel Construction (AISC) is the steel construction code for America. For us it's IS. For then there are the EN codes for England and so on. And analysis has its basis in mechanics and physics basically. So I will go week wise, seeing the like recapping. Steel as a material, we covered the material properties in week one. Steel versus concrete. Concrete is the most versatile material for construction. Why do we use steel? Steel is a much stronger material than conventional concrete. By stronger, we mean the yield and ultimate stresses are higher than that of concrete, and especially in tension, concrete has practically no strength in tension. So even in concrete structures, we need steel reinforcement to take the tension. Concrete is good in compression, but steel is much better even in compression. High strength to weight ratio. So steel structures, to generate the same amount of strength, steel structures are lightweight, so they can be used in specialized applications like tall towers, bridges, and etc. And it is also, steel is also ductile compared to concrete, and also compared to many other materials like wood, what wood, brick, whatever construction materials are used. Steel is probably the most ductile one, and ductility means that it allows for a large amount of deformation before it completely collapses, and that gives a lot of warning time for us as engineers to take measures like repair or evacuation. So that is a very important property. However, steel is much costlier than concrete, so we do not go around using steel in every structure that we build. Mostly around us, the structures that we see, the residential institutional buildings are made of concrete, but steel is a more specialized material, so it's used in factory sheds, bridges. And why do we need design is the components individually and the entire structure. As I said before, that the individual components have to take the the loading that will come in the individual components, and the entire structure as a whole should withstand the load. The load is what we are designing it against. The loads also, we generally, there are standards that we have to follow from the codes. For example, for residential buildings, we take the live load as 2 kilonewton per meter square, and for institutional buildings we take 3 kilonewton per meter square, like malls, schools, and offices. So these provisions are given in the code, and so we have to withstand so my structure has to withstand the load which we are designing it against throughout its lifespan. So that means that we have to also determine a lifespan or take a target lifespan for which we are designing the structure. So it could be 50, 100 years. And because this the time is also important, because some materials show time dependent properties like fatigue and creep. So with repeated loading and unloading, the steel or whatever material we are using deteriorates with time. So that also has to be specified. Satisfying serviceability criteria. Serviceability criteria has to do with the deflections and the deformations. So these the withstanding the load is the collapse or ultimate limit states, and the serviceability criteria are the serviceability limit states. Both have to be taken into account. To properly design a structure, we have to strike a balance between the safety and the economy. This is because that whenever we are building a structure, it's not ideal that we can keep on making it as safe as possible, and we cannot take the highest earthquake that ever occurred in the history and design every building in the world for that. We don't do that. We can't do that, due to economical constraints, and we shouldn't do that, because an earthquake is an extreme event, and there are earthquake zones, like in the world are divided into earthquake zones, and India especially is divided to 1, 2, 3, 4 zones. The four are the most earthquake prone zones, one are the safest ones. So we don't need to design a building in an area that is very low, that hasn't seen many earthquakes in history, for the greatest earthquake that ever occurred. Or for example, wind loads. India also, the codes also have a wind loading pattern. Like, I think IS 875 Part 3 is the wind loading code. So there are basic wind speeds given according to area. So for an area where the basic wind speed is low, we don't have to design it for a very very high wind speed, because there will be no point. And also, if we take higher loads, then we will need more material. We will need maybe greater constructional skilled workers. So with everything, it will increase the cost and will make it impractical. The building to be constructed will be impractical. So we have to strike a balance between safety and economy. But at the same time, we cannot compromise on safety. Safety is very important. While we cannot design like the safest structure that is ever possible, we can't do that for every structure, but there is a certain amount level of safety that we nevertheless have to maintain. So for that, we need to find a cost effective design. Yeah, so for that we will need a cost effective design, and for that we need we need to know the design procedure in great detail. Mechanical properties of steel. There are five mechanical properties that can be they are detailed by this clause of IS 800. If you have gone through the codes, you will know that the codes are generally given in the form of clauses. So the two is the clause two is a huge like 3 4, maybe it will go for 5 4 5 pages. 2.2 is a subclause. 2.4 is a subclause. That's how our codes work. And so IS 800 2007 is our Indian Standard Code for Steel Design. IS 800 is the code name, and 2007 was when it was last revised. So that is what we call it. And irrespective of the grade of steel, five properties can be taken fixed at their values. So this density is 7850 kg per meter cube. The Young's modulus is 2 into 10 to the power 5 megapascal. Newton per millimeter square is a unit used most commonly for stress quantities. So that's megapascal. Poisson's ratio is zero point 0.3. The modulus of rigidity is 0.61769 10 to the power 5 megapascal. Now, if we know these two, if we know the modulus of elasticity and Poisson's ratio, technically we can find out the modulus of rigidity, because we know that of all these properties, we need to know only two, and then the rest are all related to each other. And the coefficient of thermal expansion alpha is 12 into 10 to the power minus 6 per degree centigrade. Now coefficient of thermal expansion is relevant because this is actually quite a high value. So under extreme conditions like fire or fire conditions, steel sections will expand, and we need to take that into account for design. And the principal mechanical properties of steel that actually define the grade of steel are the yield stress Fy and the tensile stress Fu. So these two properties can be obtained both by performing a tensile stress on a steel specimen. For example, I have a steel material and I want to find out the Fy and Fu. So I'll take a cylindrical specimen, and perform a tensile test on that. From that, we will get the stress strain curve. This one. This is a cylindrical specimen. An incremental tensile load is being applied, and so from the load we can get the stress by dividing this by the cross section area. And to have some instrument to measure strain, like strain gauges. We have to plot this curve, and from this curve we know that this point, see, we will see that there is this is a very steep part, so the stress increases sharply with increasing strain. And this angle is what the tan theta is the Young's modulus. And after one point we will see that there is a change in the nature of the curve, in the sense it becomes very flat, when it considerably flatter compared to this part. So that after that point is where we say that it has yielded. There are two yield points generally, C and D, the upper and lower yield points, but they are very closely spaced, so we can just take an average value here for the Fy. Then it flattens out, and then we will see that this is a kind of strain hardening. So even as the strain increases, when a strain increases, the stress increases at a slow rate, but it still does increase. So it will reach a maximum, that is the ultimate stress, and then it will there will be strain softening, that even with increasing strain the stress will reduce, and then it will fracture here. So this is the Fy and this is the Fu point. Now in steel we don't cast the steel structure, steel buildings as a whole like we do for concrete. So steel sections we generally use, that the SP61 publishes these, the properties and the dimensions of these sections, the I section, C section, angle and T section. And these are some open hollow sections. These are, as you have seen last class, they are used in beams. Though in beams the I section is what we most commonly use. These are bars and these are flats and plates. So all the properties corresponding to these sections will are well, not all properties, but a lot of them are tabulated in the SP61, and they can be consulted readily when we are working with design. So we know, if we are given the dimensions, we will be able to find out the moment of inertia or the elastic modulus. But it is more convenient since the values are already given. This is the elasticity curve for steel. A is the limit of proportionality, a point up to which the linear nature of the stress strain curve graph ceases, or up to which the Hooke's law is valid, that is, stress is proportional to strain. B is the elastic limit, the limiting point for the condition that material behaves elastically, but Hooke's law does not apply. For most practical purposes, it can be assumed that limit of proportionality and elastic limits are the same. And the AB part is non-linear, but it is a very small region. Basically, this is a very small region. So even if we assume A and B are the same point, it doesn't matter. And C and D are also very closely spaced, so we can just say there is one proportional elasticity and one yield point instead of saying 4 points. Beyond elastic limit, there will be some permanent deformation or permanent set when the load is removed. C and D are the upper and lower yield points, points after which the strain increases without correspondingly high increase in load or stress. So the material becomes partially plastic, it starts to flow. E is the ultimate or maximum tensile stress, the point when necking starts. And when necking is this phenomenon where the cross section area reduces sharply, and after that strain softening begins. So the stress falls with increasing strain. And F is the fracture point, the point when the material breaks. So for defining the grade of steel, this point C, D, and E are most important. C and D corresponds to the Fy, and E corresponds to Fu. Common modes of failure in steel elements are bending, local buckling, shear buckling, web crushing and buckling, and lateral torsional buckling. All these we have seen in the design of beams, especially. We have seen all these criteria: lateral torsional buckling for laterally unrestrained beams, web crushing and buckling under point loads. And buckling, as we know, is an important phenomenon in steel members, because they tend to have high slenderness ratio. They do, of course it's not necessary, it will have, because we know that there are ways to classify columns or compression members as short column, tall column. So the long ones, the slender ones, are prone to buckling, and they generally fail by the buckling mode. The full compressive stress is not strength of the material is not realized. Before that, it will attain instability by buckling and will fail. So we take a reduced compressive allowable strength. And there is deflection also, which is a serviceability limit state. So week 2, we looked at the design philosophies. Okay, are there any questions? Because this is just an overview session, I will go over whatever I've gone over before. So if there are any question, you can ask now. Okay. Design philosophy. In week two, we look at the design philosophies, the working stress method. The working stress method is a design approach in civil engineering for the intricate analysis and design of reinforced concrete structures. This theory is based on the idea of computing the stresses and strains in a structure as a result of applied loads. The working stress method operates under the assumption that both concrete and steel display linearly elastic behavior, where their stresses directly correlate with the corresponding strains. And allowable stress values for concrete and steel are ascertained by considering the factor of safety. This factor of safety acts as a safeguard, accommodating the various uncertainties in material properties, construction techniques, and other influential variables. There could be uncertainty in even in the model that we are using. That we have some formulas, some empirical formulas as well to calculate the strength of our material of our element. For example, we can during design of beams we classify them as slender, compact, semi-compact. So for that we are using a an approximate empirical formula. So that also the for the more mathematical model also has uncertainties. It is not just that the material yield stress and ultimate stress will have uncertainties. There can be so many sources of uncertainty. So this factor of safety is very important. In working stress method, it is applied on the material, so it is applied on a capacity term. There are advantages that the working stress method is relatively simple to understand and apply. So it is easily accessible by engineers and designers. And in the last century, this it is the method that used to be used mostly. It has been widely used for many years and is well known among engineers and construction professionals. This is also important that for construction professionals, they have been they don't know about the codes properly. They don't, in practical, ideally maybe they should exactly follow the design that has been given to them, but they don't always do that. They have a lot of experience, and they sort of generalize a lot of those methods. And since they have the experience of years and years, so working stress method is sort of ingrained into them. So a lot of construction practitioners probably still will put the reinforcements inside concrete based on their experience from 30 years back, and that was based on the working stress method. The method is generally conservative in nature, which means it tends to result in safer designs by considering lower allowable stresses. So it has such high factors of safety that if the yield stress is 250, it will probably allow just up to 200 or 180. So the structure will be safer, but it will also become economically, it will also be costlier. So this is not an advantage. It's fine to call it an advantage because it's safer, but it also has a counter disadvantage that it will be costlier than it actually needs to be. It allows for easy comparison of the design with permissible limits, ensuring that the structure stays within safe limits. By using this method, engineers can achieve economical designs by optimizing the use of materials while adhering to safety standards. The working stress method can be easily integrated with IS codes and standards, and in fact, the IS codes, like the last two last divisions, mostly were on the working stress method. It is particularly suitable for designing simple and common structural elements like beams, columns, and slabs. The method is often based on empirical data and real world experience, making it reliable in practical applications. The method's long history of use in engineering practice attests to its reliability and effectiveness. Then there are disadvantages that the material does not fully consider the elastic behavior of materials, which can lead to potential underestimation of stress concentration on structural deformations. While conservatism is a merit, it can also be a demerit because it might result in over design structures. Over design means that we are giving more material than it's needed. We're giving a higher grade of steel or concrete than is needed. That leads to safer design, but it also leads to increased material and construction costs. The method's reliance on allowable stresses can make it sensitive to variations in material properties, potentially leading to inconsistencies in design. It is unsuitable for complex structures and situations involving nonlinear behavior, dynamic load, and unique loading conditions. Depending solely on allowable stress limits might not provide adequate safety margins for modern construction practice, which are often involve diverse and dynamic loads. So, in working stress method, we are not applying a factor of safety on the load, and we are taking the load to be just at the working load. So whatever we expect, the whatever load we are designing against, we just design against that load. We don't apply a factor of safety on that. So what if an unexpected load comes? That is not accounted for in this method, and that is accounted for in the limit state method. The limit state method of design considers all the relevant conditions pertaining to limit states of strength and serviceability. The strength limit states are based on load carrying capacity of the structure, which includes buckling, fatigue, fracture, etc. So serviceability limit states are based on performance of the structure under actual application of service loads and includes deflection, vibration, corrosion, etc. The loads at working conditions are also factored by the use of a partial safety factors for load, resulting in factored loads or design loads, and the loads at working conditions are called the working load. The normal strength of the material is called as its ultimate capacity, and the corresponding design strength of the material is obtained by dividing the ultimate capacity with the partial safety factor. So both of them, so we apply a partial safety factor on both strength and capacity, and this is the design equation. Design action should be less than equal to design strength, and the limit state is commonly expressed as strength minus action. Like design strength minus design action is called the limit state. It is a mathematical expression. If that is greater than equal to 0, the limit state is fine. If it is less than 0, the limit state is being violated. So that is that from that we can get the probability of failure of a structure, and then we can get the reliability of the structure, and that's a whole branch of civil engineering or generally engineering, risk and reliability. Advantages of limit state design. This method recognizes that design parameters are variants, even the loads. This method logically deals with the fact that there exists always a possibility of variation in loads and material properties. This method gives different weightages to different loads and materials. We know that we know that from the steel code itself that we apply different factors of safety on different materials. Like for tension and for shear, we apply different factors of safety on the material. For shop and site welding, then for concrete design, or not just concrete design, in the IS 875 part 2, the code for live loads, we have seen that we apply a factor of 1.5 on dead load, 1.2 on live load, and then there are combinations that dead load and live load will have some factor of safety. Dead load plus live load plus wind load will have some combination. I think the combinations are not given in part 2. I think it is given in part 5, maybe, the combination of loads IS 875. Anyway, so the factor of safety is, so the method gives different weightage to different loads and materials. That is accounted for by the partial factor of safety is varying for everything. And disadvantages, there is a likelihood of design errors because of more complex theory which are not so in the working stress method of design. The limit state method of design is a far better than other design philosophies. That is not a disadvantage. So IS 800 2007 is the design code for the structures, which is based on limit state method of design. However, it still maintains the working stress design approach. So I think in the appendix or somewhere there are some parts of working stress, and I think in the concrete code also there are some structures, I think, like water retaining structures, that still used to work on working stress method 5-6 years back. I think there has been a recent revision that has modified it to limit state again. In week 3, we looked at bolted connection, and week 4 at welded ones. So connections are integral parts of any steel structure that have a major role in overall integrity. Standard parts are properly connected to create steel structures because, as I've said so many times, concrete structures are cast as a whole into the formwork, so they are integrated anyway. The floors, beams, columns, foundation, everything is cast together, so they are anyway the connection is automatically built by when the concrete sets. But for steel structures, we bring the sections from the factory, and then we have to assemble them at the site using connections. And connections are often the weakest link in steel structures, so they have to be. Weakest link means that maybe if you look at the failure of 100 steel structures, maybe we will see that in a large number of them it is due to a connection failure. So see, if a beam and if a column connection fails, then the beam will fall, and then the load of that beam will not be able to transfer to the column, and then it can lead to a major collapse, even from progressive collapse, or generally. So connections are very important, and connection make up a large amount of the cost of structural steel. Connection design should be given top priority for both safety and structural economy. Types are bolts and welds. In bolted connections, methods to join structural components with the help of bolts. Simple to use and don't require any extra equipment. The process of establishing a bolted connection involves the following steps. Members to be connected are overlapped. Bolt holes are drilled on the overlap portion. Bolts are inserted into the hole with washers at their position. Washers are like this thing here is a washer. It is just, I think, used to establish a better connection between the nut and this, so the nut doesn't come directly in contact with this. And then nuts are inserted in the shank portion and tightened with the help of spanners. And this tightening is, we know, relevant because if there is sufficient tightening, we can assume it is a friction type bolt. Otherwise, if we don't want to take into account the friction, we will take it as a shearing and bearing kind of bolt. Due to the tightening of the nut, clamping action is developed in the bolt, which is transferred to the plate with the help of washer. So this is clamping action means that the normal reaction between the two plates is high, and that will give a rise to a sufficient amount of frictional resistance. Advantages: bolts have simple design, easy operation, low cost, low noise, less time, less manpower, and less skilled labor is required. Availability is high. Non-permanent joint, this is important because if you want to replace bolts, it's easy to do so. If you want to, like, see, during we design structures for a specific lifespan. So but after the lifespan, we generally don't dismantle the entire structure, we go for major repair. There's a term in civil engineering called major repair. So after its lifespan, when it's nearing the end of its lifespan, we have to get a good engineer, like and a competent engineer, and they have to survey the entire structure. They have to do tests, like there are some tests like the ultrasonic pulse velocity test, the hammer test. All those tests, we can, from that they can see if there is a crack, if cracks have been developed, or how well it is still holding up. And of course there are visual inspection of cracks and the deflection, measuring the deflections. And after that, if they need major repair, they have to replace certain parts. So for bolts, it's easy to replace because the bolt can just be taken out, and a higher strength bolt can be fitted, which is a disadvantage for welds. No risk in heating operation. Again, this is in welds, we have seen that people welding have wear a kind of mask in front of their eyes because they have to weld it at such a high temperature. There are sparks from the fire torch, and they can be replaced easily. Disadvantages: accuracy of joints depends on tightening, less axial tensile strength, high effect of vibration, more weight, proper lubrication requires protection against corrosion because it is a separate metal entity. There are two types of bolted joints: lap joints and butt joints. In lap joints, the two members are connected by overlapping, like this. And in butt joint, two members are to be connected at place end to end. So we need a cover plate on top, or on top and bottom both. So this through these cover plates, they will be bolted. So the cover plate will be bolted to this member and to this member. So as a result, these two members will be connected. Week 4, we looked at welded connections. Welding is a procedure of joining two metal portions in the molten state with or without pressure. Electric arc welding is commonly used. That is what we see in construction sites with people wearing masks, in front of, like, people wearing eye protections. Part of metal to be welded is melted by an electric arc or oxyacetylene frame along with a weld rod. This weld rod is made of the metal, and this rod is what we are melting using an electric arc. Heat will melt both the metal part and rod at the same time. Fusion happens as welding rod material flows across the arc. So the molten metal flows, and then after, when it is allowed to cool, the fusion of the two plates to be connected and the welding material occurs. Welding rod use may be shielded or unshielded. Advantages: joint efficiency is 100%. It doesn't depend on tightening. If the weld is formed, it is 100% efficient. Fabrication is in difficult structure is easy. Pure silence prevails during the process. Welding process is much faster. I mean, there's no drilling involved. Like for bolting and welding, there's drilling, and we know what kind of sound we get from construction sites. A lot of that is drilling. Those are also factors that have to be considered, though they are less important than, of course, than the safety and economy. These are also kind of important. Welding process is much faster. Welding process is much economical. This is important. And the method always provides rigid joints, minimum self fit for the structure, because bolts will have their own self fit because they are a proper separate entity, but welds is just a bit of molten material. Disadvantages: since welding is a hot process involving the non-uniform heating and cooling, structural members will be subjected to distortion, result in more unwanted stress. See, this is where we saw the thermal coefficient of expansion of steel, the alpha, that is, I think, 12 into 10 to the power minus 6 per degree centigrade. So during welding, since it is involves a very high temperature, and then non-uniform heating means there will be a temperature gradient, temperature difference between different points that can lead to temperature stresses developing. Welded structures are subjected to cracks due to non-provision of expansion and contraction. Very high labor cost since skilled labor is required. Checking and verification of welding work is very difficult. We say that a weld has a throat. We know when we are designing, we will say that I need an effective throat thickness of 5 mm. But once the welding is done, it is very difficult to check that, because it is easy to, the way we draw in diagrams, we draw a triangle and that, but it is difficult to implement in the site, and it is also very difficult to check. So when after 50 years you are doing a checking work, someone is doing and they want for to go for major repairs, for welding it's difficult to verify. Structure may be subjected to fatigue and susceptible to failure by cracking under repeated cyclic loads. Tearing of base plate metal may occur beneath the weld, known as laminar tearing. So there are butt weld and fillet weld. But in butt weld, the two plates are joined end to end, and in fillet weld, they are joined in a perpendicular manner. Eccentric connections in week 5. So the applied load generally, for simple connections, the applied load passes through the center of gravity of the connections. But in eccentric connections, the load is applied at a has an offset. This is will be the center of gravity. Like center of gravity is one point, but this is the this is the axis, center of gravity axis. So between the two lines of bolts, and the force is just a compression load. We can see that it is just a compression load applying on here, but it, instead of being applied here, it is applied with an offset or an eccentricity of E. So an additional moment also comes. So we have to design against both the compression and the moment. Connections subject to eccentric shear can be of several types. Seat connections, with these are called seat angles or cleat angles. Then framed connections, where this is applied on the web, the connection is on the web. Here the connection is on the flanges, you can see. And then there is a bracket connection where there is an offset in both, I think, for the beam and the column. Then week 6 and 7 we looked at tension members, and then I say 8 and 9 the compression members. Tension member, pulling forces are applied in the opposite directions at the two ends of a member. The bending stresses in the tension member due to its self weight are not taken into consideration. However, in case eccentricity exists in the member due to the fact that member is not perfectly straight, or there exists eccentricity in connections, then in that case either flexural stresses are considered in design, or the net area of the tension member is modified. It will be reduced. Since the area is favorable for us in tension, we know that like stress into area is the force that it can take. So any kind of imperfection we expect, we will reduce the net area, or we will reduce, like in what we do in compression members is we reduce the allowable compressive strength. So strength of a tension member gets adversely affected due to the presence of nuts, bolts, and pins at connection, due to shear lag, reversal of stresses, flexural moments in end connections due to eccentricity, etc. The presence of bolt, rivet, or pinholes influence the stress distribution at the section passing through these holes. Of course, it will, because there is a sudden gap, certain hole that cannot take the tension on other, and on the sides beside the hole, the zone can have some kind of stress concentration. Critical tensile strength stress in a tension member occurs at the section where the cross section area is the minimum. So the where the most number of bolt holes, a section that intersect the most number of bolt holes will be the weakest section in tension. As far as possible, bolts, rivets, pins are placed in one line to have minimum reduction in the cross section of area. In one line means this line. This, if you place all the bolts around this line, this will become a very weak section. Like if the tensile force is along this line, we will want to place the bolts along that line in as few number of lines as we can manage. But we often the required length of the connection makes it necessary to provide connection in more than one line. Thus, in this case, the rivets, bolts, or pins are placed in a staggered fashion. We know that for tensile strength, to get the net area in staggered bolting for tension, there is a reduction in the reduction. So there is a first we have to subtract the number of bolt holes, and then we add a term p square by 4g. So that gives an effectively greater net area than if all the bolts are placed in one line perpendicular to the application of tension. Types of tension members: wire and cable, used as guy wire in steel stacks in cable stayed and suspension bridges. This is a cable stayed bridge. Rods and bars used in lightly loaded structures like roof trusses, like these. Then flat plates and flat bars, predominantly used in footbridges and transmission towers. Roll sections and built up sections. Advantages of angle section is that it gives more rigidity to the structure compared to flat bar and do not vibrate under loads. Angle sections are used in lacings in bridges. This is lacing. We have seen in compression members, we have seen that these kind of cross bars are called lacings. Types of failure in tension members, there are three types: yielding of gross section, rupture of net section, and block shear failure. All this we have to check to get to design a tension member. Once we have the, see, we are not to design, we will not be generally be given to design a tension member. We will have a large structure of, then we have some kind of proposed arrangement. For example, a truss, we will have a connectivity, we have the overall loads that we are designing the truss against: the dead load, the live load, the wind load, earthquake load. Then we have to perform an analysis to see what is the force that has to be taken by each of the members. So some of them will be tension members, some of them will be compression members. Then to design one tension member, we have to propose a, maybe an angle section. I will propose that I am going to take this angle, I say ISA 150 150 with thickness something. Then we will check its capacity in all three of these criteria. They are very very clear cut formula based from the code. We will see its the capacity in yielding of gross section, rupture of net section, block shear failure. From all these three we will get a permissible stress, and as a result a permissible force. Then we will see that, and there will be factor of safeties incorporated into this. And then we will see that the force that was coming, that I was expecting to come on my that member, multiplied with the factor of safety, is it enough, is the permissible force higher or not. If it is higher, I will let the design go ahead. Yielding of gross section, this type of failure, where the yielding of the gross section occurs, a significant amount of deformation occurs, the necking kind of thing, before the material actually fractures. This deformation makes the structure unserviceable. Rupture of net section or fracture occurs at the member, at the section where there are the bolt holes. When the net section of the member reaches ultimate stress, then rupture or fracture of member takes place. In block shear failure, the and this a kind of block shears off at along the boundary of the bolt holes. So a segment of the block of the material at the corner of the connection shears out due to possible high bearing strength of steel and high strength of bolts. So here neither is a plate failing nor are the bolts failing. They are strong enough, but the but and collective high shear force makes the entire section shear away. Weeks 8 and 9 we looked at compression members. Did
Ma'am,
you? Yes,
yes, yes.
yes.
If you remember, we are talking about this one about rupture failure,
Hmm, hmm.
critical section rupture failure. In this, I have a question asked like previously, like LC value, the shear lag when there is a shear lag. For bolting in the formula,
Yes.
we have something LC. So I have that doubt in with respect to welding. So in welding, how we'll be calculating the LC value.
Okay. We
So
didn't.
sorry, man.
Did we discuss that last time? We discussed something related to LC, right?
Yes, we did. I mean, you told that you will be finding about that one and you'll come back. But I think we moved on again. Even I forgot.
Oh, okay, okay. Let me see. I don't have the book right now with me, but did sir solve any question like that in the class?
Yes, but sir only solved with respect to bolting, not with respect to welder. Maybe I'll go through in week 7, right? Week 7.
Yes.
Okay. No, by week 7 they already started this one.
Is this LC for rupture of net section or for block shear failure?
No, rupture, ma'am. Actually, on that class also, I was mistaken. I was telling it in block shear, but it was in the rupture failure. Where
Okay.
for general formula, we'll add some external something for the shear lag when shear lag is experienced.
Yes,
So,
yes.
while considering that shear lag formula, that will come into picture.
Okay, one second. For angle sections, the LC is relevant, right?
For
Angle sections.
for not only angle sections, for any section that it is relevant, particularly for I mean,
But this LC is
no.
related to the shear lag effect.
Okay, right, right. Mostly angle sections. Even in the I section, if it's like outstanding, like anything which has
Yes, but I
outstanding,
sections are generally not used in tension members, I think. I
sure,
think it's flats and angles. Okay, we have one last class on Tuesday. I will check this and let you know. Okay.
sure. Okay.
Okay. Compression
Ma'am, you do you have
members.
any mail or something so that see kind of thing I will take a screenshot or
Yes,
part of
yes,
it and
yes. Okay, I
send.
will write the mail ID in the chat box.
Sure. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Compression members. Okay, do you have any other doubt?
No, ma'am, nothing.
Overall, okay, fine. A member that predominantly carries compressive forces on the two ends is a compression member. An ideal compression member has some assumptions, but an ideal member does not actually exist. It has to be perfectly straight, no crookedness or other imperfection. Loads applied uniformly across the section. Center of gravity of loads coincides with the center of gravity of the member. And there are types of compression members: columns or posts, supports floor or girders in buildings and carry heavy loads. This is our conventional column. What When we think of column, when we think of compression members, the first thought that comes to our mind is columns, and this is that. And struts are lightly loaded compression members used in trusses, usually of small span. And booms are compression member of cranes. So these are columns. These are trusses. So some of these will be compression members, especially these vertical ones. And this is a boom in crane. Design aspect of compression members. Stability plays an important role related to buckling of member. Length of member also governs design, unlike in tension members, because the length was nowhere relevant in tension member. We were only concerned about the cross sectional area. But here we have to take into account the length, because the slenderness ratio is defined based on whether the column is short, intermediate, or long, and the higher the slenderness ratio is, the more prone it is to buckling. And so we even if the allowable compressive, the yield stress of my steel is 250 MPa, I have to grade it down. I have to take a lesser amount of permissible compressible strength, because it will fail in buckling even before it reaches its complete compressive strength. Lacing and batten plates. Lacing holds various members of a compression member straight, parallel, and at a correct distance apart in order to distribute the stresses uniformly between the various parts. Lacing generally consists of flats or angle sections. Requirements: lacing bars must not project beyond the column section. This again has to do with serviceability criteria, not due to deformation directly, but we are when we are placing two columns apart with a certain gap between it, there will be some architectural considerations, some requirements that I cannot let the lacing bar project beyond it, then it might hamper the working. Single lacing system and double lacing system. This is a lacing bar. So double lacing will be where there will be another set of cross like this, opposite to this. This is double lacing. Battens are plates parallel to, like, perpendicular to the column length. Plates or any other rolled sections used to connect main components of the compression member. Plates placed opposite to each other on the two parallel faces and must be spaced and proportioned uniformly. Because if we don't do this uniformly, even though battens and lacing members are helping, like, making our design safer, if there is skewness in the design or non-uniformity, then some additional stresses will come. So we would try to keep our design as symmetric as possible. Number of battens should be such that the compression member is divided into at least three bays within its actual length. So that means four layers of battening. Length of batten member column is similar to laced column, but economically not viable. So lacing is more common than batten. And intermediate batten and end battens. So these two, the top one and bottom one, are intermediate, and these ones are these two are end battens. These are the intermediate ones, and this is a combination of batten and lacing. These horizontal ones are the battens, and the inclined ones are the lacings. Steel beams. The last 2 weeks, what we have seen. This is a steel beam. Beam design has mm, these we have to design for bending, shear, and bearing, and for local and natural instability of the compression flange. This instability has to do with buckling, and that's why it is relevant in the compression flange, not in the tension flange. Then sufficient stiffness has to be there, so to keep the deflections in check. That is a serviceability criteria, and then the economy also has to be taken into account. Beam design. Achieving the optimum bending resistance, beam material must be displaced off from the neutral axis as far as possible to have a large amount of moment of inertia, large amount of flexural strength, so the flanges take the flexure. and the web takes the shear. So the web area and the thickness, if we see the height, actually the depth might be fixed due to other considerations, but the thickness we can vary. So the web area or the thickness must be sufficient enough to have adequate shear resistance. There are some challenges like lateral buckling or of beam or buckling of compression flange or web locally. Lateral buckling of beam is as a whole, and the buckling of compression flanger web is under point loads in the local case. Increasing depth increases flexural resistance but reduces resistance to lateral or web buckling. These are types of beam sections. This is just a joist. This is a joist with plates. This is a built-up I section. This is another. These are all built-up I sections. This is a built-up I section with one eye and a channel on top. So there can be many combinations we can use. Laterally restrained and unrestrained beams. We have looked at last class how to distinguish between, like we have discussed how to distinguish, and there are different criteria that we have to use, and column base will be covered in next class. So that's all for the overview session. If there are there any questions?
Ma'am, are you able to hear my voice?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yes. I'm sorry, maybe some issue with your network or my network. I was not able to hear your voice continuously. There is some breakage in the voice. But if you're able to hear my voice,
Hmm.
like,
Yes, yes. From where could you not hear?
yeah, I mean, the teaching part was good. I was just asking, maybe I was thinking my network is bad or not. So
Okay.
you're able to hear my voice
Yes, yes,
clearly,
yes.
right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I have a question in ongoing session, sales lecture regarding purlins. Can I ask about that one?
Yes, yes. Do you want to share the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
1 second, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am. Are you able to see this?
Yes.
So yeah, so this is going on, and this is like a purlin. This is like inclination, and this is placed on it.
Hmm.
And this H dash is like wind loads,
Okay.
and P is like vertical loads, like a dead or alive.
Yes.
And consideration of this P dash and H dash doesn't seem to match what sir is mentioning. I thought maybe this should be different. And there is no mention of H exactly where they are mentioning what is H here.
H is a
Uh,
horizontal load.
H
H,
is horizontal load. Okay.
no, it
Then
is
P.
horizontal, not along the U axis. The UV axis are the inclined axis. Consider the conventional X and Y axis. If X is the horizontal one, see the theta that sir has shown, the
Hmm.
theta should the line, there is one inclined line, and then the theta is the angle with the horizontal. So that.
Uh, and let's say let's consider what they are taking theta with the vertical then.
Hmm.
Also, if we consider in that way, maybe P dash is like along VV, let's say. And
Okay.
because I'm saying the P dash is like H plus P cos theta, so P cos theta should be like VV.
Yes,
So
yes,
even
yes.
considering in that way, there will be H dash, but they are given H, and also the same thing H dash. If this H dash should be considered like horizontally, so that it will be matching with the P sin theta.
Yes, yes,
But
yes,
this
there is
seems
some.
to be doesn't match this one. So
Exactly. Wait. It should be that if P is the global vertical load and H is the global horizontal load,
hmm,
and theta is the angle with the vertical, theta is the angle with the horizontal,
okay.
then the if the H dash axis is how he has shown, and the P dash axis is along the U axis, then it should be P sine theta, right?
So what exactly you're saying? P sin theta, like which
Wait.
is p sine theta you're saying? Ah, okay, the vertical one, the VV one.
No, no, p sine theta should be 1 second. No, if theta is the angle with the horizontal,
Hmm.
then p sine theta will be along the UU axis. Look at the UU axis in inclined one, right?
Huh.
And
If
then
okay. Mm-hmm.
wait, I will just write it. This is very simple. I will just write it. Just 1 minute.
Yep. Sure.
Well, wait, is it visible?
Once I'll stop sharing so that I can see your image.
Okay, okay, but it is coming as a mirror image. Can you see? Can you make this out?
Yes, yeah, I can see this.
So there should be a p sign. In p dash and h dash, the both, like p and h both should come, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Did he by any chance mention that h is along, like there is no h in the absolute horizontal direction? Did he mention that the h is along this line only on the VV axis?
There's no mention about any H actually.
Okay, there is no h. Okay,
Huh.
then there is
Again,
no.
in the bottom, I guess there is some here. Sir is about to write like in MU consideration. Sir is about to write H, I guess.
I think that h is. I think that when wind load acts, I think
Hmm.
it's just that if this is the purlin, if this is the line of, suppose this is the line of the purlin, then the wind itself comes like this. So the
Okay.
gravity load will be globally vertical, but the wind will be in an inclined direction. So the wind load is only h dash exists, and there will be one p whose component along this axis and this axis we have to take.
Okay. I mean, okay. So you're saying like you should be taking only in the axis of UU and VV.
Yes, yes, yes. But what this h is, I'm wondering, because p sine theta is h dash. Yeah, actually, p sine theta is h dash. But then, see, if there is a global horizontal wind load, then there will be one component of that along h dash, right? Because
Yes. Yes.
it there will both will be split into two components.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure what is being done here exactly, because that h dash only has contribution of p and no contribution of h. Oh, okay, wait. So the only explanation of that is if the wind is along this line. If the H load is along the UU axis, only
Hmm.
then H dash will only have contribution of P, because if the H is along this, it will have no contribution in its perpendicular direction.
Okay. So you can say like H dash is H, and let's say like that H dash is like is equal to H, and the so H contribution will not be about UU. It will be like completely perpendicular.
Yes, yes.
But again, theta,
But
the with
theta is
respect to
opposite. The theta is given wrong here, because cos theta, if so this is cos theta and sin theta, then theta is the angle with the vertical of the incline.
ah, yes.
Yes, that is for sure.
Okay, ma'am. Right. That's all, ma'am.
Okay, okay.
And And actually, you're saying about the water retaining structures and the working stress method. Actually,
Yeah.
yes, I have worked in water retaining structure for some time,
Okay,
and
okay.
there are still some, it depends upon client, and most of the clients were required to do. I mean, they are asked to do in working stress method still
Hmm.
in these days.
Hmm.
So
But
yeah, but the cost difference is so much. Even like, one in one
um,
situation, the client asked for the first time like a limit state method, and then he changed to do wanted to in uncracked section. So
yes, yes, yes. Uncracked. Working stress is uncracked design.
yes.
So,
So in limit state, we got the length of the, I mean, thickness of the wall is like around 600 but
hmm.
changing to working state, same with same load consideration, it got like around 1 meter length. So it's like a huge difference.
So in we are saying in limited it was economical, right?
Yes, it limits
Yes.
it to a economic. But in limited also we have considered the crack width. Again, this is zero point
Uh-huh.
0.1 mm crack width. We have
Yes.
considered all these things.
And I think that
Still,
revision has been really very recent, like 2022 or 23. There has been a revision in the code, right?
yes, that revisions we are not presently considering because even there's no pressure from clients, so we are not also like directly considering that one. But yes, there's a recent revision in that one.
Yes, yes. Because limit state actually allows some kind of deformation. It allows after post yielding wet behavior. So it actually utilizes the full capacity of the material instead of
Yes.
taking
Uh,
it very taking the limits very low. That's why the limit state is ultimately
but
better.
in kind of water retaining, this is not about economical or not economical in terms of usage. This should be economical in terms of longer usage. Like let's say, ma'am, like we have smaller, even 0.1 mm crack. If the water started leaping for like 10 after 10 years, if you consider, it
Hmm.
may penetrate long throughout the depth. So they do not want to take any chance in kind of flooding where excess pressure comes
Okay,
for
okay.
untracked sections.
So that is serviceability requirement. The cracking is related to the serviceability requirement.
Only serviceable kind of thing. Yes.
Okay, fine. This is very interesting. Civil engineering is a very interesting subject because you can see it in practical applications and everything.
True.
Okay,
Okay then, ma'am.
okay. I'll end the class. I'll. You can mail me in case of any doubt, and the LC I'll try to get to know by Tuesday.
Sure, ma'am. Definitely, I will.
Okay. I'm ending the class.